Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to take a seemingly technical or administrative decision, something you'd probably find buried in a handbook somewhere,
Yeah.
and really reveal the fundamental ethical commitments hidden inside it.
Exactly. We're going to be turning a conversation about file formats into, well, a much bigger discussion about equity, about stewardship, and even intellectual freedom.
That's right. We are zeroing in on this really comprehensive proposal that was presented to a major academic organization, the USI Society. And on the surface, the document is just asking a simple question.
A very simple question. Should the members of USI be allowed to submit their research papers in, say, Microsoft Word, or do they have to stick to a PDF-only rule?
And your first thought might be, okay, who cares? This is just internal housekeeping. But Chandra Nath, who wrote this proposal, argues that this choice word versus PDF is actually a critical ethical crossroads.
It really is. Nath frames it as something that defines who gets included in the scholarly conversation. It also defines how resilient the Society's archive will be, say, 50 years from now.
And whether the organization is truly acting as a responsible steward of all this intellectual output. It's a much bigger deal than it looks.
It is. So our source material is Knapp's detailed briefing. It's called Equity in Form, the USI dual format submission policy, and it has all these technical appendices with it. And the core of the proposal is to shift USI's policy to one that, yes, accepts PDFs, but also explicitly guarantees support for submissions in Microsoft Word and even open document format.
So our mission today is really twofold. First, we need to analyze why Nath frames this not just as, a matter of convenience, but as a mandatory ethical stance for any society that says it's committed to inclusion.
And second, and this is so important, we have to distill the massive kind of hidden infrastructure and the operational changes that are required to make this policy actually work.
Right, because if you don't, you could inadvertently harm the very members you're trying to help.
That's the trap. We'll be breaking down the specific technical standards, the required financial investment in support systems, and the policy revisions that are needed to get to what Nath calls true parity of support across this really diverse community.
The core tension here, and this is what we'll keep coming back to, is this balance between procedural inclusivity on one hand.
Making it easy for everyone to submit, no matter their background or what software they have.
Exactly. And on the other hand, this almost existential responsibility of long-term knowledge preservation, archival integrity. We're trying to solve for the present and the far future at the same time.
And that is the challenge. If we dive into Nath's core argument, the entire proposal is built on these three pillars of justification that really elevate this whole thing from an administrative choice to an ethical responsibility.
Okay, let's get to those pillars then. Because when you talk about file formats, it's so easy to get lost in the technical weeds. So why? Why does Nath say this is fundamentally about ethics?
It's because the format, believe it or not, dictates access and participation. The first pillar Nath lays out is inclusivity and anti-exclusion. The argument is that a seemingly neutral technical rule can have these powerful implicit gatekeeping mechanisms baked right in.
A gatekeeping mechanism. Okay, unpack that. How does a file format become a gatekeeper?
Well, it's all about acknowledging that different disciplines have different norms. A PDF-only mandate, for example, almost always implies that the author has to be pretty skilled in an advanced typesetting language.
You mean something like LaTeX?
Exactly. LaTeX is the big one. And the proposal points out that being good at LaTeX is pretty standard, even essential in fields like physics, computer science, and parts of math and engineering, the STEM fields.
Right. So if USI were to say it's LaTeX or nothing, it's sending a very clear message about who it values most. It's favoring members from those specific fields.
Precisely. And conversely, you have entire disciplines, history, literature, sociology, education, a lot of the health sciences, that overwhelmingly rely on commercial word processing software.
Microsoft Word.
Microsoft Word is the giant. So by formally accepting Word, you are actively lowering the barrier to entry for the humanities and the social sciences. You're saying, we recognize that the tools people use to create knowledge are diverse, and that's okay.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I'm thinking of a brilliant, early career humanities scholar. Their research is all about archival work, complex narratives, deep qualitative analysis. The last thing they should be doing is spending a weekend trying to debug a LaTeX compiler error just to meet some technical submission rule.
That's a perfect example. That format preference is actively stealing time away from their actual scholarship.
Which gets to another one of Nath's principles, right?
Sure.
Valuing the content over the format.
Exactly. valuing content over format. The ethical stance has to be that the intellectual contribution, the idea itself, is the only thing that should determine whether a paper is accepted. You can't let someone's mechanical ability to typeset a document become the gatekeeper.
And this works both ways, too. Nath uses this term, reverse exclusion. What does that mean?
It means that while you're advocating for Word users, you can't swing the pendulum too far in the other direction. A Word-only mandate would be just as bad.
Ah, because then you'd be excluding all the scholars who work primarily in LaTeX.
For sure. For a lot of those researchers, the PDF that comes out of their LaTeX code is their primary stable document. So this dual format policy is really a pragmatic attempt to meet all the members where they are. It respects the varied technological capital within the society.
And when we say technological capital, we're not just talking about whether you can afford a Microsoft Office license, are we? It's much broader than that.
Oh, absolutely. It's about time. It's about fluency, training, institutional support. Think about a scholar at a small college, or maybe someone based in a developing economy. They might have access to a basic version of Word that came with their laptop, or maybe they're using free open document tools. They probably don't have access to the big institutional site licenses, or the sophisticated training, or, the IT support for advanced typesetting that's readily available at, say, a top-tier R1 university's engineering department.
So by accepting the most common tools, USI is basically ensuring that a lack of specialized technical capital doesn't mean you don't have a scholarly voice.
That's the goal. That's the foundation for inclusion.
Okay, so that foundation is set. But now you've got this pile of different file formats floating around, which brings up a really serious question of integrity and finality, which is the second pillar. If Word is fine for submission and review, why the hard line? Why must PDF remain the non-negotiable format for the final archived version?
This is where the ethical discussion shifts from inclusion in the present to stewardship for the future. PDF is still paramount because it serves these crucial long-term preservation and intellectual integrity functions that a mutable or changeable format like Word simply can't.
Okay, so give us the technical breakdown here. What is it about PDF that makes it the gold standard for preservation?
Specifically, it's the commitment to PDFA. And this is key. It's not just any old PDF. PDFA is an actual ISO standard, ISO 19005, that was designed specifically for long-term electronic document preservation.
And what's the difference between a normal PDF and a PDFA file?
The differences are subtle, but they are critical. A PDFA file has to be completely self-contained. That means all the fonts have to be embedded inside the file itself. Color spaces have to be fixed and device independent. And it can't rely on any external resources.
What do you mean by external resources?
Things like links to an external website for a font, or embedded video, or any kind of executable code that might just stop working in a few years.
So it's basically a time capsule. It carries everything it needs to render the document exactly as it was published, no matter what operating system or software exists in the future.
That's it, exactly. It ensures that USI's published works will still be readable and visually accurate decades from now. It makes them completely independent of whatever Microsoft or Apple or Google are doing at the time. It's an act of intellectual responsibility to posterity.
And this ties into another concept Neth brings up, which is fixity. He calls it a non-negotiable requirement. What is fixity?
Fixity is the guarantee that a document is fixed, that it's unaltered from its official published state. Once a paper is converted to that final PDFA, you've established a reliable, unchangeable, canonical version that people can cite and reference with confidence.
How big of a risk are unintended changes, really? I mean, in the academic world, if you just relied on a Word doc as the final version.
The risk is constant, and it's often really subtle. Think about just simple versioning issues. An author submits a Word doc, a reviewer opens it in a slightly different version of Word, maybe on a Mac instead of PC.
And suddenly the pagination is all off.
The pagination shifts, a line break moves, an equation reflows in a weird way because of a font substitution. If that document is supposed to be the canonical reference, then every single citation that's based on a page number is now instantly unreliable.
I see.
That's why scholarly publishing needs a format that prevents that kind of accidental modification. PDF locks down the intellectual product. It respects the author's final, approved intent, and it provides a stable foundation for the entire academic conversation that's built on that work.
So the Word document is like the flexible workshop. It's for collaboration, drafting, reviewing. But the PDFA is the permanent, unalterable contract with the scientific record.
That's a perfect way to put it. And this leads us directly to the third pillar, which is maybe the most strategically important one: digital sovereignty and resistance to vendor lock-in.
This feels like we're moving beyond just internal policy and into the organization's relationship with the entire tech industry. How does a file format choice relate to a society's sovereignty?
Well, in today's digital world, if you mandate a single proprietary format, you are essentially tying your society's entire workflow, from the moment a paper is submitted to how it's archived forever, to one commercial ecosystem.
So if USI said everything must be a .docs file, they'd be completely dependent on Microsoft's whims.
Exactly. On their pricing, their update schedule, their feature roadmap, their licensing structure, the whole 9 yards.
That sounds like a massive, long-term strategic vulnerability.
It is. The proposal calls this coercive alignment. Over time, it can lead to, huge costs and an erosion of intellectual freedom. What if the vendor decides to change its terms or restrict access or just get rid of a feature that USI relies on for its operations?
But PDF is different because it's an open standard.
It's an open standard. Its specifications are public. Its implementation isn't controlled by a single company. So by committing to PDFA for that final published record, USI is securing its digital sovereignty.
It's future-proofing its own archive.
It's ensuring that its archive, which is the most valuable asset it has, is accessible using a whole range of tools, including open source software. It ensures that reading that knowledge in the future doesn't depend on keeping up a perpetual subscription to one company. It's a move that serves the broader public interest of scholarship by keeping the intellectual record free and independent.
That's a remarkable transformation. We started with a simple administrative choice, and we've landed on the idea that accepting different submission formats is an ethical move for inclusion, and mandating an open archival format is an ethical move for stewardship and digital freedom.
That's the ethical foundation, absolutely. But, and this is a huge, but NAF warns very, very strongly that a passive implementation of this policy is, and I'm quoting, perilous.
Perilous.
The ethical stance only works if USI commits to significant active infrastructure support. If they just open the door to word submissions and then walk away, the whole policy risks failing and, as you said earlier, hurting the very people it's meant to help.
Okay, let's pivot to that then. Let's talk about the implementation challenges, because this is where the rubber meets the road. We're talking about the hidden traps here.
Right. And the first major trap is what NAF calls the deception of false neutrality. The idea that a society can just declare a level playing field, but these underlying systemic biases can keep that field tilted.
How does that work? How can just allowing both formats end up creating bias?
Well, the most insidious risk is implicit bias in review. Think about it. The reviewers are often senior academics, and over years, they've internalized expectations about what a serious submission looks like.
And a LaTeX-generated PDF just looks serious. It has that crisp typography, the perfect figure placement. It looks professional.
It carries an air of rigor, yeah. And then a document submitted as a standard Word file, even if the research inside it is absolutely groundbreaking, it might look less polished. It could give off this subconscious vibe of being less prepared or, less serious.
And the reviewer might not even be aware they're thinking that.
That's the point. They're not consciously thinking this is a Word doc, so it's bad. But subconsciously, they might give the LaTeX submission the benefit of the doubt on some minor point while scrutinizing the Word document more harshly because its default formatting looks more like a draft.
That's content contamination. The package is influencing the evaluation of the gift inside.
Exactly. If USI doesn't actively work to mitigate that, the policy could end up just reinforcing a bias against the very scholars who are using the more accessible tool. It's a terrible outcome.
That's completely unacceptable. What starts as an inclusive policy becomes a hidden disadvantage. And it might even pressure Word users to learn LaTeX just for the aesthetic benefit during peer review.
And that hidden pressure is made so much worse by the unfunded mandate problem. This is a huge trap. If USI says, sure, send us your Word files, but the unspoken expectation is that every author must eventually produce a beautiful print-ray compliant PDF.
Then the society has just outsourced all that technical labor.
All of it. I see you've got it. That scholar who wrote their paper in Word now has to figure out how to do a high-quality conversion, how to deal with equation rendering, font embedding, accessibility tagging.
All this stuff they probably have no training in.
And that entire technical and temporal burden falls disproportionately on the scholar who chose the simpler tool to begin with. This is the absolute definition of outsourcing the labor of inclusion to your least resourced members. They saved time writing, but now they lose a massive amount of time troubleshooting a technical conversion process right before publication.
Yeah.
The ethical ideal just completely collapses.
And it collapses because the society failed to invest in the support to do that labor itself.
Precisely. And the tools the society does provide have to be equal. This brings up the risk of template inequality.
Okay, explain that.
Well, imagine USI provides a really sophisticated, constantly updated, feature-rich LaTeX template. Maybe they host it on a service like Overleaf with all these built-in compliance checks. It's top of the line.
So it's easy for the LaTeX users.
Very easy. But then for Word users, they just offer a basic generic Word file with a few paragraphs of instruction. If they do that, they are actively creating a disadvantage. The Word-using population is starting from a technically inferior position from the get-go.
And that just reinforces the perception that LaTeX is the serious format.
It does. Parity of support has to mean parity of the authoring tools you provide.
Okay, so beyond bias and the labor burden, Nath brings up what he calls the accessibility paradox. The entire ethical argument here is about access, but we know that both formats Word and PDF can be total failures if accessibility standards aren't rigorously enforced.
This is such a critical point. The file format is just a container. What really matters is the accessible structure inside that container. With Word, a document is only accessible if the author has been really meticulous.
You mean using styles correctly?
Using built-in styles for headings, heading 1, heading 2, providing accurate alternative text, alt text for every single image, structuring tables correctly, all these things that are crucial for screen readers.
And the reality is, most of us were taught to format visually. You make a title look like a title by making the font bigger and hitting the bold button, not by applying the title style.
Exactly. And to a screen reader, big, bold text is just big, bold text. It doesn't communicate any structure. So if you don't use styles, the document has no navigable roadmap, and that's a huge barrier for someone using assistive technology. Nath says these practices are just widely misunderstood and overlooked.
And the same is true for PDFs, right? People think a PDF is automatically accessible, but an improperly made PDF can be even worse.
Oh, they're notorious barriers. If a PDF is just an image scan of a page, or if it's generated without proper tagging, it's essentially a flat picture to a screen reader.
The screen reader has no idea what's a heading, what's a table, what order to read things in.
None at all. And as Nath points out, a badly made, untagged PDF is often worse for a screen reader user than even a poorly styled Word document.
So the ethical standard here isn't just accepting a PDF, it has to be an accessible PDF.
Correct. The proposal is really firm on this. Simply accepting PDF is ethically insufficient. If USI is serious about inclusion, it must explicitly require accessible, tagged PDFs that are compliant with the PDF UA standard.
PDF UA, Universal Accessibility.
Right. It's ISO 14289. That's the technical benchmark for truly usable, navigable content for people with disabilities. And it has to be aligned with broader standards, like the WK 2.1 Level AA guidelines.
Can you just quickly break down what WK 2.1 Level AA means for a scholarly paper? What does that actually entail?
Think of it as 4 principles. The content has to be perceivable, so, enough color contrast and graphs. It has to be operable, meaning you can navigate everything with a keyboard, not just a mouse. It has to be understandable, so the language is clear. And it has to be robust, so it works reliably on different devices and with different assistive technologies. PDF UA is basically how you apply those principles to the PDF format specifically.
That raises the stakes quite a bit. Now, what about the internal burden? For the USI staff who have to run this whole thing, let's talk about the operational complexity and integrity.
Right, because managing 2 separate workflows adds a lot of complexity. The first headache is version control. The editors have to be incredibly meticulous to track changes and make sure the content in that initial changeable Word doc, which might go through multiple rounds of review and revision, is absolutely identical to the final, fixed, published PDF.
Because if a typo, or worse, a tiny change in a data table, is made in the Word file late in the game, and that change gets missed during the final conversion to PDF,
the integrity of the published record is compromised instantly. It requires entirely new protocols for diligence, and then there's the high risk of feature loss during conversion.
What do you mean by feature loss?
Scholarly papers are complex. They have intricate mathematical equations, high-res scientific figures, specialized typography for things like chemistry or linguistics. Getting those elements to convert perfectly from Word into a compliant PDF can be a minefield. A lot of standard conversion tools will just degrade or misrepresent those complex features.
Which could actually misrepresent the author's findings.
It could. So the bottom line on complexity is that the society has to maintain two parallel, equally high-quality technical pathways for every single manuscript. It's a huge lift.
Okay, that realization that you need these parallel, high-quality pathways seems like the turning point. We've laid out the ethical ideal and all the technical traps,
Yeah.
so now let's get to Nath's framework for what he calls active equity, the actual investment required to do this right.
Yes. This is where we move from problems to solutions.
And it starts with the idea that the policy has to be an active, supported framework, not a passive statement. And the solution begins with just rewriting the policy itself to be clearer and to promise support.
Right. You have to replace a vague slogan with a clear, descriptive promise. And Neff's proposed statement does a really beautiful job of balancing that need for inclusion with the need for preservation.
Let's hear that proposed policy statement again.
Okay, it reads, USI welcomes submissions in editable formats, Microsoft Word.docs or OpenDocument.odt, for an inclusive and collaborative review process. For publication and archival, final manuscripts must be submitted as accessible, tagged PDFs to ensure perpetual readability and universal access. Society-provided templates and conversion support are available to all members.
That is so much more robust. It gives different roles to the formats. Editable for collaboration, fixed and accessible for the permanent record. And that last line is everything. It ends with a non-negotiable promise of support.
And that promise is what triggers the most critical investment of all, the parity of support infrastructure. This is the real money and staffing commitment that turns the unfunded mandate into active equity, and the infrastructure has to be first class for both user groups.
Okay, let's start with the templates. How do you ensure technical equality for the LaTeX community and the Word community?
For the LaTeX overleaf users, USI has to commit to maintaining an official, first-class USI article overleaf template. And this isn't just a style guide. It has to be a fully functional environment that builds compliance in from the very beginning.
So what are the technical details that had to be built into that LaTeX template?
The source material is very specific. The template has to use certain LaTeX packages, like the hyperref package. That's what's needed to generate hyperlinks, and the basic PDF structure tagging. And crucially, the template's code needs specific commands for metadata things like PDF use title and PDF display doc title.
Why is this so important?
Because that's what ensures the document's title and structure are correctly recognized by accessibility checkers and archival systems. The template also has to be configured to generate a PDFA-compliant output by default.
So the sophisticated template does all the heavy lifting on the technical side, which makes it easy for the LaTeX author to do the right thing without having to be an expert in PDF standards.
That's the idea. Now, for the Microsoft Word users, the commitment has to be just as robust. USI needs to develop and distribute an official, first-class USI template.ex file.
And why is using a dedicated .ex file so much better than just giving authors a PDF guide to follow?
Because the .ex file enforces the correct behavior. It should come pre-configured with accessible, built-in styles for everything. Title, Heading 1, Heading 2, Heading 3, Abstract Caption. By creating an official template that pushes authors to use these styles, USI nudges them away from that bad habit of manual visual formatting.
Away from just making text big and bold.
And towards semantic formatting, which is absolutely essential for accessibility.
And the instructions that come with that Word template have to be really explicit about accessibility, I'm guessing.
Yes. The documentation can't just be about margins and fonts. It has to coach the author. It should have a mandatory step that says, run Word's built-in accessibility checker before you submit. The distribution strategy also has to maintain parity. The LaTeX template is on Overleaf. The Word template is on the USI website, but it's bundled with the dedicated accessibility guide and a really specific PDF creation checklist.
That checklist for making a PDF from Word sounds vital because it's so easy to get that wrong.
It's the difference between success and total failure. The instructions need to have screenshots, step-by-step guidance. For example, detailing the exact menu path file, then export, then create PDF XPS, and hammering home the critical importance of checking the little box that says document structure tags for accessibility, and selecting create bookmarks using headings.
And you missed that one checkbox.
If you miss that one checkbox, the resulting PDF is basically worthless to a screen reader, no matter how well-styled the original Word doc was.
Wow. That level of detail really shows the scale of the commitment here. But templates and guides only go so far. What happens when an author, despite all that help, just hits a technical wall?
And that is where the proposal's signature commitment comes into play, the establishment of the USI Format Support Desk. This is the ultimate tangible proof of active equity. This is where the society says, we will absorb the conversion labor for our members.
A dedicated staff support desk just for file formatting and accessibility. That sounds like a major infrastructure investment.
It is. This desk would offer a free PDF conversion and accessibility review service. The proposal even suggests a specific service level agreement, a guaranteed 72-hour turnaround time for any member who emails in their final accepted Word document.
So what does the member get back in those 72 hours?
They get back three things. First, the final tagged accessible PDFA compliant file ready for publication. Second, a detailed accessibility report card showing any issues that were found. And third, some suggested fixes for their original Word file so they can learn and improve their own process for next time.
This completely solves the unfunded mandate problem. The scholar focuses on the scholarship. The society takes on the specialized technical labor of making sure that scholarship meets archival and accessibility standards. This is the real cost of ethical operation.
And to add to that, NAITH recommends holding virtual accessibility office hours. These wouldn't just be for troubleshooting. They'd be targeted training workshops focused on teaching skills, how to use styles, how to write good alt text, how to use that PDF export checklist. It helps current authors, and it gradually raises the tech skills of the whole membership over time.
Okay, so beyond providing that hands-on support, authors also need ways to check their own work before they submit. What validation tools does the proposal recommend?
Self-empowerment is a big piece of this. For Word users, that built-in accessibility checker is the first line of defense. But for the final PDF output, the proposal recommends a suite of more specialized external tools. Authors should be encouraged to use Adobe Acrobat Pro if they have it, but also to leverage some really good free tools. Specifically, the free PAC 2024 checker. That's the PDF accessibility checker. It gives you a highly specific visual breakdown of accessibility failures, focusing on tag quality and reading order. And then, crucially for the archival part, authors are urged to run their files through an open source tool called VeraPDF.
VeraPDF. What's its specific job?
So while PAC checks for accessibility for human readers, VeraPDF checks for fixity for the archives. It validates the file against the strict ISO standards for long-term preservation. It checks font embedding, color profiles, forbidden elements. By recommending these tools, USI ensures that authors who want to handle the technical side themselves can do so with high-quality, publicly available resources.
This incredibly detailed framework leads us to the final pieces of the puzzle: mandatory enforcement and community alignment. This is where the policy stops being a suggestion and becomes a rule.
Exactly. The commitment has to be baked into the actual acceptance process. The proposal insists that accessibility has to be a condition of final acceptance. This is mandate and enforce accessibility.
How does that work in practice? Is an editor manually checking every single file for compliance?
No, that's not scalable. The submission system itself needs to have automated accessibility checks integrated into it. When an author uploads their final PDF, the system should run a quick compliance check against standards like WCAG 2.1 Level AA and PDF UA.
And if the file fails?
If the file fails to meet the minimum standards, if it's not tagged, for instance, the submission should automatically be sent back to the author with a remediation report explaining what's wrong.
That's a serious layer of technical enforcement. It takes accessibility from being this, nice to have ideal and makes it a non-negotiable requirement for publishing. It aligns the society with the broader ethical movement for inclusion.
And finally, all of this, the infrastructure, the templates, the enforcement, it all requires community understanding. USI has to educate and align community norms.
This is about getting buy-in from everyone, the editors, the reviewers, the authors, so they all understand why this huge investment is so necessary.
They have to clearly communicate the why. Emphasize the long-term benefits of archival integrity, the moral imperative of inclusion. They need to show this isn't just more red tape, but a strategic investment in the society's future relevance and ethical standing.
And most critically, they have to go back and actively fight that implicit bias we talked about earlier, the bias that sees a polished LaTeX PDF as inherently more credible.
This requires direct intervention. Reviewers have to be trained to assess submissions based only on the merit and originality of the content, completely independent of the document's formatting polish. USI might even need to consider standardizing the review format, maybe converting everything to a single plain template for the review stage, just to make sure that the ideas, not the formatting, are the only thing being judged.
A direct countermeasure to the deception of false neutrality. I like that. It ensures the ideas are always the focus.
Well, this has been a really in-depth analysis. We started with what looked like a very simple technical question: should we accept a DOCX file? And it took us on a journey through equity, digital stewardship, and the real cost of building inclusive infrastructure in a scholarly society.
The synthesis seems really clear. Chandrananth's proposal shows that adopting this dual format policy isn't just a good idea, it's an ethical necessity. But, and this is the key, only if it is backed by real commitment to active equity, not passive permission. The society has to be willing to balance that procedural inclusivity of accepting Word with the existential responsibility of preserving knowledge in stable, open formats like PDFA.
And the central conclusion, the biggest risk that Nath identifies, is the one that has to be the permanent warning sign. The society has to constantly guard against the risk that it might inadvertently outsource the labor of inclusion to its least resourced members. The policy only becomes a genuine covenant of care when the society actually invests in the support infrastructure, the templates, the help desk, the validation tools, to make sure every single member can participate fully and equally, no matter what their technological starting point is.
And if a scholarly society's legacy depends not just on the brilliance of the ideas it publishes, but on how those ideas are preserved and who gets included in that process, that raises a final provocative thought for you, the listener. What is the covenant of care for the documents that you create every day, even outside of formal publishing?
Yeah, think about it. When you create a presentation, a report, or even just a long email, are you thinking about fixity, preservation, and most of all, accessibility? Do you use semantic structure? Do you apply heading 1 and heading 2 styles in your word processor? Or do you just fall back on the visual shortcuts of making text bold and big?
That choice, which feels like such a small technical detail, just like PDF tagging.
It determines whether your document is truly readable and usable by everyone, including people who rely on screen readers. It's a small technical step, but it's a powerful daily act of care.
Something to think about the next time you hit save. We hope you feel thoroughly informed and maybe a little more aware of the ethical weight that's carried by the seemingly simple choice of a file format.
Until next time.
Join us again soon for another deep dive.